all. My esteemed panel, come on up, take your seats. I'm the clicker. Oh yeah, that's right. And my not esteemed panel, come on up. So I really want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This is an important forum for us, and we're going to be discussing human trafficking, anti-human trafficking preferably, and we're going to be discussing some crime updates. I do have an announcement, and I've already spoken to the press and the videos. There's a section here that cannot be filmed. So the entire presentation that is on the screen cannot be filmed. Okay, and the presentation that is given by our panel expert who's going to be presenting on that cannot be filmed. And I respect everybody will please honor that. If you can, thank you for coming. And so I really do appreciate that respect because we are dealing with sensitive information and people's lives. On that note, we're going to be talking about human trafficking, we're going to be talking about grooming, we're going to be talking about the justice system, and all of our panelists have areas that they want to focus on. I'm going to just ask them to take 1 second, introduce who they are, and then I am going to be in the back with a microphone as questions are asked. I will walk around. I ask, please, that you raise your hand and let the panelists finish their presentation. Okay, so I would like our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and once that's done, I will turn this over to our panelists, but I do want to thank specifically my co-host, Farzana, for helping me put this all together, and I want to really thank our Chief of Police because he's just amazing. So, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'll go first. Good evening. It's great to be here. My name's Nicholas Karist. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the District of Vermont.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Travis Bingham, and I am the police chief here in Newport.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Jennifer Harlem, the Sheriff of Orleans County.
Andy Jensen, Station Commander, local barracks here in Durban.
Farzana Leyva, Orleans County State's Attorney.
My name is Katie Newell. I'm the Human Trafficking Case Manager Coordinator for Vermont, and I'm housed out of the South Burlington Police Department.
Okay, I want to thank legislators for being here, our council members for being here, and all of the other professionals who have come out. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to you, and this is the section that you cannot film. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Katie Newell, and I am the Human Trafficking Case Manager Coordinator for the state. My office is based out of the South Burlington Police Department. However, I serve the northern part of the state, providing direct service to individuals who have experienced exploitation or are at risk for experiencing exploitation. In addition to my direct service work, I am the co-chair of the Training and Outreach Committee for our state to provide training and outreach on the trends of trafficking and best practices on what we can do when we are met with somebody who has potentially experienced exploitation. And so I'm happy to be here to share a little overview of trafficking here in Vermont. I like to start with a quote by a survivor. "We are failing because we have not identified human trafficking as the public health issue it is. You see, trafficking is not a short-term affliction. It affects a survivor's whole life, families, and even entire communities." And that is so true. What I want you to think about while I'm presenting here today is considering what if the trafficking experience wasn't the worst thing that this person has endured. It doesn't matter how long an individual has been in their trafficking experience, because their experience is individual to themselves, and the effects can have a long-lasting standing on their personhood. Human trafficking is a fundamental violation of human rights. It is a crime that involves the exploitation of a person for the purpose of forced labor or commercial sex through the use of force or fraud or coercion. And the reason that I am saying "or" is because it can be a combination of force, fraud, and coercion, or it could be one or the other. Now, it's really important to differentiate that minors cannot consent to commercial sex. There's no such thing as a child prostitute. So for anybody under the age of 18, you do not need the elements of force or fraud or coercion. That means anything of value exchanged for a commercial sex act. For anybody under the age of 18, that could be considered trafficking per our statute. This is the action means purpose model. How did that person get into the situation? They were recruited, harbored, enticed, transported, provided, maintained, advertised, or solicited for the purpose of involuntary servitude. So that could be labor trafficking, debt bondage, peonage, commercial sexual exploitation. And they were held in that situation through the use of force or fraud or coercion. Now, force, fraud, and coercion, those are the means for which that individual was trafficked. Now, in that purple section, it shows you for specifically to anybody under the age of 18, there doesn't need to be that element of force or fraud or coercion. However, that young person would need to be recruited, harbored, enticed, transported, provided, obtained, or maintained for the purpose of a commercial sex act. Now, how were the victims kept in their trafficking situation, right? So what is force or fraud or coercion? I feel that sometimes it's easier to understand physical abuse, right? Sexual assault and rape, that is something that is easy for us to recognize and wrap our heads around, right? I think what's important to talk about is the threat of violence, the threat of people being harmed that you love and care for, the deprivation of basic needs, so taking away your basic needs to have you do what is asked of you. And then once you meet that need, you may or may not get that what you've been asking or needing, that basic need of food or water or sleep. Another big piece that we see in Vermont surrounding force is that facilitated drug use. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but there is an intersection between substance use and trafficking. That is a vulnerability, right? Having a substance use disorder is a vulnerability. And there are individuals who, as a gradual expansion of boundaries, while they are meeting the individual or have met the individual that is exploiting them, they may try drugs or get into using drugs in a way that they wouldn't have normally unless it had been suggested or maybe even forced on them. Now, for also additionally, okay, stop that. In Vermont, we see a lot of fraud and coercion. What I mean by that is that promise of a better life, attention, employment, living conditions. Vermont is a rural state, and I think it can be hard to always meet our basic needs. You know, transportation can be challenging, especially in our rural pockets. Having promises of a better life, promises of a life that you can only imagine. I think we can see how these false promises may seem exciting for some of the younger individuals that might be in your life, right? In addition to fraud, right, that withholding of wages, promises of employment that don't turn out to be employment that you believe that you're getting into. In addition, as those threats to loved ones, your friends, your family, your pets. I want you to think about a time that you've heard somebody might say, I can handle the abuse, I can handle the pressure, I don't want my partner, my family. For me, it's my dog. If somebody were to threaten my dog, I think that I would have a really hard time because my dog is my life. In addition, I think it's really important to highlight that threat of arrest or deportation. That threat could also be somebody that is maybe system involved, a mom who is single parenting and has DCF involvement, or that person that is exploiting that individual. If you don't do what I ask, I may call your probation officer. I may call your DCF worker. I'm going to call law enforcement because you're the one that is engaging in harm, not me, right? There could be withholding of legal documents. And when we don't have our basic needs met, then we may be vulnerable to other psychological manipulation and control. This is not an exhaustive list of the vulnerabilities that may be an on-ramp for somebody to experience exploitation. We do know that some of these vulnerabilities may make somebody more of a target to be exploited and groomed. And we'll learn a little more about that dynamic of exploitation, on how it takes a time for an individual who is exploiting other people to get to know them, to hone in on those very specific vulnerabilities. And this is an example of some of the vulnerabilities that we see. Why is it the fastest growing crime and so profitable? It's a reusable resource, unlike drugs and guns. You can sell a body maybe 5 or 6 times a night. And oftentimes drugs and guns are being sold once. It is a limited interdiction compared to drugs and arms. We talk about exploitation or trafficking being hidden in plain sight, right? Those profit margins are high, but when they're hidden in plain sight, we don't recognize, unless we know what we are looking for, we're not recognizing that individuals may be in this life. You see, human trafficking is our language. When we approach individuals who we believe are being exploited, and I were to walk up to them and say, "Hi, my name is Katie. I believe you're being human trafficked." What kind of response do you think I would get from that, right? And the reason that it is so hard to identify is because people are not identifying themselves, and because they believe that this is their life. They believe that this is what they are required to do, right? Additionally, it's not always seen as a crime. It's just sex. There is a stigma of a prostitute or a criminal or choice. And these are the most vulnerable individuals in our community. You see, the difference between commercial sexual exploitation and sex work is economic gain. Somebody else is profiting for somebody's work. It's incredibly difficult to prove because the individuals who are being exploited have been groomed over time to distrust anybody other than the individual whom is taking advantage of them. And, the victims are the individuals who are experiencing exploitation. There's not a better way to say they're not perfect, because nobody's perfect. None of us are. We all come from our own backgrounds. We all have trauma. We all have our own experiences. But the individuals that are being sought out to be exploited are smart enough. They have vulnerabilities. They may also have a substance use disorder. They may be seen as criminals through our system and society. And that's because there is a strong duality between victims and forced criminal exploitation, or forced criminal activity, excuse me. So they're not individuals who have experiencing exploitation, you know, they're not showing up as somebody that is maybe asking for help immediately. I think it's really important to talk about the difference between trafficking versus smuggling. You see, trafficking involves the exploitation of an individual. It is a crime or a violation against a person, where smuggling is a crime or violation against a country. And with trafficking, there needs to be the element of coercion. There needs to be additional exploitation or forced labor, and we can talk about that in a little while. A trafficking person is seen as a victim by the law, and an individual who has been smuggled, they are seen as a criminal. Now, oftentimes when somebody is being smuggled from one country to the other, or to a next, that's an unauthorized border crossing, and that facilitated illegal entry from one country to another is illegal. But now think about a circumstance where somebody may have paid to be transported from one country to another, and once they got to that country that they had paid to be moved to, and something may shift, right? The job that you were promised when you came to the other country might not be the job that you thought it would be. So I want to talk about how a smuggling experience can turn into a trafficking experience, but on its own, trafficking and smuggling are two separate things. A study of over 600 homeless youth reports that 1 in 5 experienced human trafficking. 8% reported being trafficked for labor, and 81% were forced into labor exploitation through forced drug sales. In addition to these industries listed where labor trafficking occurs, we want to peel back that onion a little bit more. And some of the additional signs that somebody is experiencing labor exploitation could be a worker living with their employer under poor living conditions, owing money to an employer for those living conditions, for that housing, or having to pay a recruiter, or possibly that recruiter could have been a coyote who had moved an individual from one country to another country. With labor trafficking, it's really, does that person feel pressure to stay in a work situation, and do they wish that they can leave? Going along with those poor labor conditions, are there people working or living in a very cramped space? Are there multiple people living in a 1-bedroom apartment, all having to share a bathroom and all working a lot of hours just to meet their needs? It could be somebody that is unable to speak to another individual alone. It is always concerning when there is somebody who is speaking for another person, right? We know that to be true. We want people to have the autonomy to be able to speak for themselves. In addition, a person's answers to questions or an assessment, they may feel scripted and rehearsed. It's also a red flag that if an employer is holding identity documents such as a passport, a work visa, an ID, is that person afraid? And are they afraid that they're going to be seriously harmed, or if they are not doing the work that has been asked of them? And if they're showing signs of physical abuse. And again, all of these examples and these industries are where labor trafficking occurs. It doesn't mean it's happening all the time, or it doesn't, take that back. In addition to the industries where labor trafficking occurs and talking about the red flags, there could be still more to it. And what we want to do when we're working with an individual who we believe has experienced exploitation is taking time to learn about who they are, what are their individual vulnerabilities, and seeing what is their fear compelling, what is their fear compelling them to do, or how is that compelling them to act. Labor trafficking of children and youth in the United States, a scoping review. In cases where family members coerce children and youth into labor trafficking, the violation of relational trust can contribute to the development of complex trauma reactions, wherein a young person's attachments, biology, affect regulation, awareness, behavioral control, cognitions, and self-concepts are altered. So what this is talking about is familial trafficking. And familial trafficking exists in our state, in our country, and I believe that it has been going on for generations and generations. And that this having a child and being forced to engage in labor trafficking for their family really can change their projection and outlook on the future based on how it is affecting their personhood. So cases in Vermont, these are examples of cases that we see and the individuals that we are serving here in our state. So being forced to engage in commercial sex acts to meet a basic need. That could be having a place to stay, money, food, whatever that basic need is. We have children that are doing favors for their parents. That may look like running and moving drugs, or it could be stealing, it could be other forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Adults being used for benefits. This is really sad to think that people with disabilities are being exploited at a higher rate, but they are vulnerable. They are often relying on somebody else to help them make decisions, and sometimes the wrong person can be brought into their lives. Runaways, individuals who are youth that are on run are incredibly, incredibly vulnerable. We're also seeing an increase in forced criminal activity and organized crime that could look like gang involvement. These are examples of the types of trafficking that we've talked about today and will continue to talk about. The trafficking, pimp-controlled trafficking. The difference, when I prefer to use the word trafficker, I think that there is, when we say the word pimp, or when I say the word pimp, what does that bring up for you? Close your eyes, try to think about what does a pimp look like, right? And to me, I think of somebody that is wearing a velvet suit, maybe walking around with a chalice, with a top hat, right? Somebody that they are sensationalizing what the life is, what this life looks like or could look like. So I prefer to use the word trafficker. Intimate partner trafficking. I'll tell you that most of the individuals I've served, they at one point or another believe that the individual who is exploiting them is somebody who cares for them deeply, and maybe a boyfriend or girlfriend or husband. Gang control trafficking looks a little bit different all over the place, and here in Vermont we are seeing an increase in hybrid gangs where maybe some younger kids are committing violence and acts of harm. In Vermont, I will say that we're not seeing too much gang controlled trafficking. We are seeing a lot of intersections between human trafficking and gang activity. But more to come on that, because I'm sure as trends continue to change, we'll see an increase in this probably soon. I hope not, but that's what I'm guessing. Trafficking within illicit businesses or trafficking within legitimate businesses, right? So trafficking can happen anywhere, right? We talked about how it's hidden in plain sight. It is something that we are are something that's incredibly underreported. And as I mentioned before, people aren't often self-identifying that, hey, I'm a victim of human trafficking. It takes time to get to know an individual, to get to know their vulnerabilities, and to start that psychoeducation. So we can see that it's happening within illicit businesses, and it's also happening within legitimate businesses where everybody may not know what exactly is going on. And then, of course, familial trafficking. And, think about, are there any other types of trafficking that you can think of? DCF, the Family Services Division for Vermont, defines sex trafficking of minors as a range of crimes committed against children and adolescents, including but not limited to sexually exploiting a minor, recruiting, enticing, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining minors by any means for the purpose of sexual exploitation for commercial sex acts, exploiting a minor through survival sex, exchanging sex or sex acts for money or something of value, such as shelter, food, or drugs. Because remember, anything of value exchanged for sex, if you're under the age of 18, that is considered commercial sexual exploitation. Using a minor in child photography, exploiting a minor through sex tourism, mail order bride, or an early marriage, or in exploiting a minor by having them perform in sexual venues. Now, DCF's definition is aligned with our state definition. Now, just to give a snapshot of DCF's involvement with youth, they began tracking reports of suspected trafficking in 2014. So from 2014 to December of 2023, there have been 272 reports flagged for sex trafficking. Doesn't seem like a lot, does it? Now, in 2023, 25 reports were accepted. If we want to look back in 2022, 41 reports with allegations of sex trafficking of minors were accepted. And that was an increase from prior years when the average was 27 cases per year since 2017. Again, these numbers seem fairly low. And I think it's just to talk about, going back to it's hidden in plain sight, and it's often that we are not, it's an underreported crime. Most of the youth identified in these reports were being trafficked while living at home with a family member. Think about that for a moment. Living at home and still being exploited. And I'd be willing to bet that not everybody in the family knew what was going on. I'd also be willing to say that in some circumstances, the family had no idea what that youth was going through, and that they must feel so alone if they're still living at home and still being harmed. And then if we want to go back and think of that force, fraud, and coercion, what fear does this young person have that they can't share with a trusted adult on what's going on with them? And how scary that might be. It's also, I don't know that this is surprising, but the youth identified have been mostly female. This is in addition to the snapshot that it shows that most victims have been between the ages of 14 and 17. The common themes include exchanging sex acts for vapes, for drugs, for alcohol, phone cards, electronics, promises of becoming famous, and having their basic needs met. The types of trafficking that we're seeing or that were reported are youth being trafficked by caregivers, gang-involved trafficking, and that could look like moving drugs, running drugs, retail theft, youth being trafficked by non-caregivers, parents being trafficked and needing to protect their youth, and also there is a large increase of youth and that are vulnerable to being exploited. And so we've had a brief overview of, juveniles and exploitation. And one piece of this that we really want to talk about is our youth that are on run or running away. So why do kids run away? I want you to think about that for just a moment. Are they choosing to run away, or is it the only option that they are given? I want to reflect on this a minute, though, because it's not the options that you have. These are the options that the youth believes that they have, right? I'll tell you, I think mostly that my experience is that love is a driving factor for youth to want to run. It could also be that they're not feeling like they're being seen or heard or cared for at home. And they could be feeling unsafe. I think it is important to also mention that online enticement. Trafficking can happen online. It does happen online. And so how well do we know who is on the other side of our kids' Snapchat or their chat rooms, right? Do we know who their friend group is? Who is their romantic partner? Or are they in placement and they're running to be with their bio family? But oftentimes, there's a reason for why youth are on run. And that may not be a reason that you or I think is the best reason, but to them, it's important. And so it's important for us, if we have youth that are in our lives that are on run, or if we have youth that we know that are on run, that we are showing up for them, that we are making them feel seen and heard and cared for, and that we are hearing them out. And we can agree to disagree, but what options can we give them that might be a better option than running away? In 2021, the National Crime Information reported that there were 337,195 missing children. It's probably not shocking to learn that 94% of those missing children are endangered runaways. And in one day, NCIC reported 36,611 missing children. On average, in Florida, one child is recovered deceased each year while missing. And I know that's statistics in Florida. And I know it's easy to say, well, Florida's not Vermont. That doesn't happen here, but it does. And one child deceased is one child too many. How does Vermont's data compare? Between January 1st, 2018 and March 16th, 2022, there were 823 juveniles reported missing. Of those, 165 were in DCF custody at the time they were missing. So you see, running away, exploitation, human trafficking, intimate partner violence. It's not just a system thing. It happens when the youth or individuals are even not in the care of DCF. More than half of the juveniles in DCF custody have had more than one case of going on run. The data indicates that DCF custody nearly triples the likelihood that a juvenile will be entered as a missing person more than once before they turn 21. That's a lot, right? The data indicates that juveniles in DCF custody are more likely to be on the run for 8 or more days than juveniles that are not in DCF custody. Why do you think that is? Juveniles that are in custody and are on run, they are going to be seeking family. They're seeking attention. They're seeking someone to care for them. And when they don't have somewhere to go, or they've shown up to the same place multiple times, and that person who is housing them might learn that they're on run, and they may not want system involvement, they may no longer be an option for that youth. And so they may continue to go and find what meets their needs. And what meets their needs may be dangerous. And that data also suggests that youth who had run away 2 or more times are more comfortable and more resourceful the longer they spend on run, making them more vulnerable to exploitation. Because they've got this, right? How many of you have a teenager in your life? I know that they often know more than we do, and they've got it all figured out. And sometimes that not having somewhere to go back to makes us try harder when we're wanting to be included in a family dynamic. I've mentioned that females were mostly flagged for DCF reports. We have not done a great job at recognizing male victims. They are often overlooked. It's important to acknowledge that men and boys are victims of both sexual exploitation and labor trafficking, and they are less likely to be perceived as controlled by a trafficker when they are commercially sexually exploited. I also know, based on my experience, that there is an added layer of shame and self-blame for men and boys when we are working with them to identify what their vulnerabilities are or what maybe had compelled them to get into this lifestyle. Human trafficking of a child is child abuse, and if you are a mandated reporter, it is a mandated report. So DCF's Child Protection Hotline is open or is available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. If you suspect human trafficking of a juvenile, please call 1-800-649-5285. And please, when you are calling, be as specific as you can as to why you believe that a youth is being trafficked. Who commits acts of trafficking? It is anyone who profits. A trafficker, as I've talked about, is very skilled at honing in on a very specific vulnerability that an individual has. They are preying on individuals with low self-esteem and minimal social supports. And why do you think that? Because they are wanting to see where they can insert themselves into this person's life. A trafficker is willing to invest a great deal of time and effort to break down any natural resistance and suspicion. So slowly, over time, an individual is being broken down and rebuilt to be a person that meets the needs of a trafficker. And in that time, that person is being pulled away from natural supports. So in that time that a trafficker is, working to spend time with an individual, getting to know them, they are likely promising better life, right? They're promising maybe economic opportunities, love and affection. Because at our core, we all want to be seen, heard, and cared for. And a trafficker is going to be promising and offering and showing acceptance and protection, the hope, right? Hope for a better future, hope for success, promises of a better life. What is the impact of being trafficked? And now the impact can be significant regardless of how long an individual has known their trafficker or has been in contact with them, right? So we know we're going to think about those promises. So that trafficker is promising a better life of success. And that success to reach that success, that may mean that you're compromising your own values. Now, a trafficker, when they're building an individual up to be the person that they are wanting to sell or use, right? They're building a bond with that individual so that they are not feeling trusting of others. That individual is going to be supporting the abuser's reasons and their behaviors. They're going to believe that the individual that is exploiting them is the only person that they can trust. It is the only person that cares for them. It is the person that continues to show up for them. So of course, they are going to have positive feelings towards the abuser and in turn have negative feelings towards anyone trying to support them. They're going to draw on that fear. And based on fear, I think we can all consider times where we've met with somebody who is leading with fear and what that might look like, right? That may look like somebody is rationalizing violence. They're unable to engage in behaviors that may help them in exiting their situation. They may be moving towards disconnection and self-destructive behavior, medicating with substance use, right? There is an impact on the individual for all of the promises that a trafficker is offering. There is an impact on the individual who is being exploited. What we know about forced criminal activity is that although there is no official nationwide data on how many trafficking survivors have a criminal record as a result of their victimization, we do know that people in trafficking situations are frequently arrested, detained, prosecuted, convicted, incarcerated, or deported without ever being identified as a victim of human trafficking by the criminal legal system. And why is this true? We know that forced criminal activity is a part of this game. We know that individuals are committing crimes for which they've been forced to do. But to that individual, they may not see it as being forced. They may see it as the only option that they have. We know that a climate of fear creates that anxious attachment. So when a trafficker is displaying unpredictable behavior, rage, verbal abuse, and then mixing that in with acts of love, promises of a better life, attention, maybe that is having a new bag, new shoes, something, right? An occasional indulgence. Well, we know that that person or any individual is going to want to get back to, how do I receive the acts of love and attention? What can I do to avoid experiencing rage and that unpredictable behavior, right? And so we've talked about this throughout our time together, is that harm is not just physical. It can include that reputational harm. And so when we're thinking about human trafficking, and we're thinking about commercial sexual exploitation, and we're thinking about labor trafficking, I want us to also be thinking about how an individual may be forced into criminal activity, right? Because that fear creates that attachment. And what would happen if that person said no? When we're thinking of forced criminal activity, we should be thinking of a reasonable person of the same background and in the same circumstances. What is this person's vulnerability, right? What is their past? Who are they as a human? Who are they as an individual? Are their vulnerabilities, or do their vulnerabilities make them more susceptible to the coercive methods that a trafficker may use? You see, it is so important that we get to know the individuals that we are serving. It is important that we connect an individual who we believe has experienced exploitation with somebody who has the time to learn a victim's vulnerabilities. You see, discovering vulnerability requires a lot of listening, and it requires trust to be earned. And that trust needs to be earned before we start asking any questions, right? I say to the individuals that I serve that I am not asking them to be honest with me until they can be honest with themselves. I am also letting them know that I don't expect them to trust me. Trust is earned. I know and understand that the individuals that I am working with are going to test my boundaries, because we don't know enough when we're first introduced to an individual who may have experienced trafficking, what their past is. Who are they as a person? So what we know is that coercion, it encompasses everything. It encompasses the force, physical restraint, fraud, serious harm, and abuse of the law. And just as this cycle is continuous, there are gaps in the cycle where we can meet with an individual and kind of try to find ways to break this cycle. He made me believe that he cared and was going to help get me off the streets. Instead, he got me addicted to Roxy, Xanax, methadone, and Somas, all bought illegally to keep me addicted and controlled. This is the United States versus Andrew Fields. It is a federal case out of Clearwater, Florida. And the reason that I share this quote is that this case set the precedent that drugs can be used as coercion. Addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequences. It is considered a brain disorder because it involves functional changes to brain circuits involved in reward, stress, and self-control. Those changes may last a long time after a person has stopped taking drugs. Addiction is a lot like other diseases, such as heart disease. Both disrupt the normal, healthy functioning of an organ in the body. Both have serious, harmful effects, and both are, in many cases, preventable and treatable. If left untreated, they can last a lifetime and may lead to death. And we're going to start talking about the intersections of substance use and trafficking. The initial decision to take drugs is typically voluntary, but with continued use, a person's ability to exert self-control can become seriously impaired. This impairment in self-control is the hallmark of addiction. Brain imaging studies of people with addiction show physical changes in areas of the brain that are critical to judgment, decision-making, learning and memory, and behavior control. These changes help explain the compulsive nature of addiction. And so if we take what we hear from this quote, and we take what we've learned on trafficking so far, we can see how drugs can be used as force, right? That facilitated drug use. Maybe you're trying a new drug for the first time because your trafficker has advised you that it's going to help you perform better. Or maybe an individual is using a drug in a way that they haven't used it before, right? Somebody is saying, I only smoke drugs, I only snort drugs. And then all of a sudden, now they're injecting drugs, or drugs have been injected in them, right? It's my understanding that that changes the effect of the drug or the feeling of the drug within that individual. And so drugs can be a powerful tool for not only force, but also for coercion. Because the drugs can change how we are able to make decisions. We've talked about how addiction has a complex relationship with human trafficking. I would say about 98% of the individuals I serve, there is a substance use component. Especially here in Vermont, it can be incredibly challenging to find services for detox and recovery. We currently have 2 places for inpatient rehab for substance use disorder that I know of that accept Medicaid or Medicare, that are frequently used. And a lot of the individuals that I serve, they have been to inpatient rehab multiple times, and some are no longer allowed back. There are barriers to getting into substance use treatment. The lack of supportive housing is a barrier. We really need to be offering a place for an individual to feel safe and to feel secure. And I'm saying for them to feel safe and for them to feel secure, because we are not the best people to be telling them what safety is for them. The individuals that have experienced exploitation, the individuals who have been trafficked, the individuals who we are serving, they are going to be telling us what is safe for them and what security means for them. And in a perfect world, we will be providing that for them. The substance use component also adds complication to an already complex treatment plan, right? That timingness, readiness, and treatment availability. Oftentimes, when an individual has reached a point where they are ready to get help and get out, we need to be prepared for them. And that means outside of Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, right? We need to have the ability to show up for any individual that is experiencing exploitation and be ready to offer them options for them to take a step forward in their recovery. When we are tying together traffickers, drugs, and coercion, we have a couple examples to offer. A trafficker could start out as a dealer and then suggest a different way to pay when the buyer runs out of funds. There's no such thing as free drugs, right? And so I would say that a red flag for me would also be somebody that is not paying for drugs. I would want to ask a little bit more about that to understand how they're getting their drugs. Because oftentimes somebody may feel like they're in control, they're being cared for, they're getting all of their needs met, but there's a price to pay. There's anything between a trafficker and a victim, that their relationship is transactional. A trafficker could be, or may be, waiting outside of recovery or rehabilitation centers with drugs for when that person gets out. A trafficker could also be the one to suggest that an individual goes to receive substance use help. So they may be the driving factor of an individual going to receive care. And let's think about that. What does that look like for that individual? That individual probably thinks, oh, they wouldn't ask me to go to rehab if they didn't actually care about me. They must really love me enough to suggest that I go get help, right? A trafficker could post bail for a victim to avoid detoxing in jail. And I've seen the opposite happen. They cannot post bail and have somebody sit in jail to teach them a lesson. We do have two corridors running up right through Vermont, right? In my experience, We have gang-affiliated individuals who are traveling from cities in Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, and are hosted by locals, oftentimes, taking over houses or being housed in some of our rural pockets of more rural parts of the state. And our Vermont laws are more favorable. But a misunderstanding of that law can lead to violence. Trauma and trafficking. What are the effects or the needs of an individual who has experienced exploitation? It's a quote by a survivor, Patricia Deegan, and it is such an important quote for me. I would like to have a t-shirt made, I think. Each person's journey of recovery is unique. Each person must find what works for them. This means that we must offer the opportunity to try and fail and to try again. In order to support the recovery process, mental health professionals must not rob us of the opportunity to fail. Professionals must embrace the concept of the dignity of risk and the right to failure if they are to be supportive of us. I believe that we've all seen this Maslow's hierarchy of needs at some point in your life. This is a theory of motivation which states that 5 categories of human need dictates an individual's behavior. Those needs are the physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization needs. It's also believed that we cannot move up until we have met all of our basic needs. In terms of trafficking, Maslow's hierarchy of needs can help us understand why victims are drawn to and controlled by the trafficker. Traffickers actually use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to identify and exploit the needs of their victims. If we're looking at the physiological needs, a trafficker may be the person that's providing basic needs like food, water, shelter, and clothing to start drawing the victim in, to offer the basic needs, and to start providing that sense of safety. Love and belonging. A trafficker may be exploiting the fact that some victims may experience family and belonging for the first time through exploitation and being trafficked. In the sense of building self-esteem, a trafficker is, right? We had talked about a trafficker is targeting individuals with a weaker self of a sense of self-identity. And therefore, a trafficker is using a variety of psychological manipulation and control tactics that include luring, seducing, grooming, manipulating an individual to have a sense of self-esteem that may not be authentic. And then self-actualization. That can look like a trafficker providing false dreams for the future to capitalize on a victim's desire to realize their highest potential. Knowing what we know, that traffickers are targeting people who are vulnerable in society and are utilizing Maslow's hierarchy to meet their needs, we need to be doing the same. We need to be offering basic needs, safety and security, love and belonging. And so we need to be working sometimes parallel to the trafficker to rebuild an individual, for them to realize what their own wants and desires of a better life are outside of what a trafficker has told them they can and should be. what we know of the needs of individuals who have been trafficked. The most important thing for an individual to experience when they are contemplating exiting the lifestyle that they've been living is that they have a safe place to go home to, that they have housing, and that they have food, and that they have the opportunity to receive medical care, and that they have the option to receive a mental health screening if that is what they desire. It is so important to give an individual who has experienced trafficking time and options for them to identify what is most important for them. It is important that we are offering options that can provide that individual with their own safety and security. And once they have stable housing, and once they are able to not have to guess where their food is coming from or what they will be eating, then working on additional needs, right? Safety planning, having a case manager. In the Vermont Human Trafficking Case Management Program, we have 2 case managers that are working to act as a neutral point of contact to help an individual who has been trafficked identify and meet their needs. We do not work alone. We work with providers throughout the state, and our goal and hope is to provide wraparound services for individuals who have experienced trafficking, and in that to meet their long-term goals, right? And be working with a team that can support what their individualized long-term goals are. We are always wanting the individual who we are working with to be the one making decisions for themselves, right? We want them to be making the decisions, and then we can help facilitate getting the services in place for them and walking beside them through their experience. So, and the long-term goal, right, is to work towards employment. But sometimes we have to learn how to be employed. Education. Who are the social supports that can provide additional help to an individual? And then addressing that chronic medical and mental health needs. If we go back to when we first started this presentation, and I asked, what if the trafficking experience isn't the most traumatic event the victim has experienced? We want to recognize that trauma has a broad effect on an individual's personhood, and that affects every area of their functioning. And that early trauma can be linked to exploitation. And so, again, when we are working with individuals who are vulnerable for exploitation or have had experiences of trafficking, it is so important to recognize the whole person, not just the incident that you are being brought into, because it is something that is affecting an individual's physical, emotional, behavioral, spiritual, mental, and social selves. What is the reaction of an individual who has experienced exploitation? They may not want to leave the situation, right? We talked about how they are going to be possibly defending their trafficker. And why? Why are they doing that? Because they have, through a gradual expansion of boundaries, they have pulled this individual away from a lot of their natural supports, even paid supports, right? So an individual may not want to leave the situation because they may feel that they are being treated well. And that might be true. We don't know their whole experience. We don't know that they had been treated, that this person isn't treating them better than others have. An individual who has experienced trauma, they may not be showing an emotional reaction, or they may not be showing an emotional reaction that you think that they should be showing when they're sharing a story. Instead, they may be hostile, may be perceived as being manipulative or deceptive, right? They may be angry or irritable. You see, I don't believe in saving and I don't believe in rescuing. What I believe in is showing up for individuals. I believe in walking beside somebody. And so that's when we are meeting an individual who has been trafficked, or when we are working with somebody, I think it's really important that we are managing our own expectations and staying focused on what those expectations are, right? We need to be prepared and ready that an individual is going to be showing up and, not wanting to talk to law enforcement, which is absolutely okay. I shared when we started that my office is based out of the South Burlington Police Department, and the other case manager is located in a police department in southern Vermont, and we are able to serve individuals regardless of them working with law enforcement. Not wanting to talk to law enforcement is absolutely okay. Refusing services is absolutely okay. Because what we can do in the time that we are meeting with somebody is we can do our best to show up as an authentic, caring person, and recognizing that that trust is earned. So that when an individual disappears and they go back into the life or the trafficking situation, we can have hope that we have done a good enough job showing up for a person that when they are ready, they will call us or they will reach out again. It's important to recognize that there is a connection between human trafficking and domestic violence. There are different forms of victimizations. There are some similarities, and there are definitely intersections between these two types of violence. Power and control is used by both traffickers and batterers to dominate their victims. And the range of tactics used by traffickers can resemble that of domestic violence perpetrators. Common tactics used by traffickers that include isolation and physical and emotional violence, financial abuse, threats to family members, use of children to manipulate and control their victims, and withholding of sleep and medical care, among others, among other tactics. But what is the difference? How does human trafficking differ? Economic gain. Traffickers use abusive methods of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of forced labor or commercial sex. The relationship is transactional. There's an economic gain. How can we support victims of trafficking? What are the needs of the survivors? We've talked a little bit about it during our time together. The biggest need that we have is to meet their housing need. It has been a long-standing dream of mine to have a home or a specific apartment building for individuals who have experienced trafficking. You see, right now, we don't have any specific shelter in we don't have a human trafficking specific shelter within our state. And I have a lifelong dream of having an apartment building where we can house individuals who we are working with that have are in the process of getting out of the life, where we can provide them with those wraparound services, and so that they can start identifying for themselves what it is they want, what support looks like for them, and how we can meet those needs. It's really important that we are connecting individuals with the Vermont Human Trafficking case managers, and also utilizing our hotlines for domestic and sexual violence. You can reach out to 211 or call any of the hotlines that are listed online through the Vermont Network of Domestic and Sexual Violence. It's really important to use an empowerment model and to constantly and always be offering resources and options for survivors of exploitation, or however that individual identifies themselves, whether that's a victim, a service user, a client, or a survivor. It's important to safety plan, not only for ourselves, but also most importantly for the individuals that we're working with. And when we're safety planning for the individuals when we're safety planning with the individuals that we're working with, it's important that they are the driving force behind that safety plan. One thing that we can do when we're working with an individual who we believe has had an experience of trafficking or exploitation is to validate their experience. That validation acts as a reparative emotional experience, providing that client with the empathetic understanding and support that they may have lacked in the past. They may have never felt validated. They may have never felt heard. They may have never felt seen, right? It's important for us as community members, as service providers, to recognize that our own power and privilege, right? Because when someone's been trafficked, there's an inherent loss of power that occurs through that force, fraud, or coercion. And that loss of power, real or perceived, can be a trauma trigger. So when we are talking about supporting survivors of exploitation, we have to recognize that we hold immense power and can perpetuate harm unintentionally. So we want to always acknowledge the role that privilege and power, meaning that we are of authority, how that impacts survivors. It is so important to recognize that you cannot exert power and expect to empower. Best practices. What are we doing here? What are some of the efforts that we are doing right now to meet the needs of trafficking survivors? We are working towards creating multidisciplinary teams throughout the state. Multidisciplinary teams are comprised of professionals that range in many different disciplines. And the teams, you see, teaming strengthens and coordinates a community's response to concerns regarding trafficking. None of us can do this work alone. And we need to be working together with other stakeholders throughout the state that include survivors, so that we can work together to improve the community response to human trafficking by bringing together multidisciplinary stakeholders. The purpose of the multidisciplinary team is to provide cross-system coordination, to improve the victim's experiences when seeking help, to engage in prevention, education, and achieve more desired legal outcomes. Multidisciplinary teams have been widely adopted across the United States, and MDT implementation is considered a best practice in the response to human trafficking, sexual assault, and child abuse. In Vermont currently, we have a trafficking-specific multidisciplinary team in Chittenden County, and we are working to build a multidisciplinary team in the Orleans County. We are working to build a multidisciplinary team in Orleans County. And we're not stopping there. We're looking forward to meeting with stakeholders throughout Vermont and building multidisciplinary teams throughout the state so that we can take a unified approach to addressing human trafficking in Vermont. When you are working with an individual who has experienced exploitation, or if you believe that you have somebody in your social circle, in your family, or you meet somebody and your gut is telling you, oh, this person, there's more to this, there's more going on. It's important to consider your own comfort level in working with victims of trafficking. It's important to recognize and to check in with yourself. What biases or projections do you recognize in yourself when working with vulnerable or trafficked individuals? And this is a daily check-in, sometimes hourly, depending on what is going on, right? Because we as providers, we as humans have stuff. We have things going on in our lives. And are we showing up for somebody as our most authentic self? Are we showing up? Are we present? Are we intentional? Are we asking questions for the sake of getting somebody help or giving them options for them to take the steps for themselves to get help? Or are we asking questions because this is such an interesting story and gosh, I've never heard anything like this, right? So it's really important that we are checking in with ourselves before engaging with an individual who has had lived experience of trafficking. It's also really important for us to understand and manage our own expectations or outcomes with the service user. Remember when I said I don't believe in saving and I don't believe in rescuing? What I do believe in is showing up. I believe in never giving up. I believe in the individuals that I am working with. And no matter how challenging that can be or that can feel, what we need to do is we need to show up with our time. We need to recognize that trust is earned, and we need to validate an individual's experience. We also need to take care of ourselves, because if we are not whole ourselves, we cannot be supporting individuals who have experienced trauma or individuals who may be looking to us for options and guidance. Thank you.
Again, I'm Nicholas Karist. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the District of Vermont. My office prosecutes federal crime in Vermont. We work with all of the people who are here tonight presenting. I want to say thanks to them first before I touch on the subjects that Katie addressed. Chief Bingham, Sheriff Harlow, Vermont State Police. We partner with Farzana, and we rely on Katie and people like Katie in cases that involve trafficking. I wanted to touch on two things about these kinds of cases. One is where in the federal criminal realm do we see these kinds of cases the most? And then secondly, how do we approach them? So maybe not surprisingly, maybe it's not surprising just to me because I see it every day. We see these kinds of cases most in the intersection with drug trafficking. Katie talked about that as one of the categories that she sees in her work, and that is definitely the predominant area where we see instances of trafficking. We see drugs as a tool of control, and these drugs lead to people becoming victims of trafficking. It doesn't, in our experience, start out that way, but the drugs are used as a tool, and then the people who are suffering from substance use disorder become victims of trafficking. So that's where we see these cases the most. Katie mentioned these are difficult cases to prove. We tend to develop these cases based on tips, and either the tipsters or the victims of the trafficking are often not interested in testifying, being witnesses in these kinds of cases. So that leads to, how do we approach these cases? We try our best to take a victim-centered approach to these cases, which means that sometimes a case where we know that there's trafficking going on doesn't always get charged as a trafficking case. There are a number of federal statutes that prohibit different types of trafficking, but it is often the case that we end up charging these kinds of cases as drug trafficking cases, with the idea being that if we can prosecute the individuals who are both trafficking the drugs and trafficking people, we can remove them from their illegal conduct, at least temporarily. And oftentimes the drug trafficking is easier to prove than the human trafficking. That's what I wanted to touch on, where we see these cases, how we approach them. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have, but most of all, I want to thank the people here who do this work every day, and the close partnerships that we have trying to eliminate this kind of conduct in Vermont as much as we can.
Yeah, we're by no means any resident experts in this field, but as with any investigation, I think what the U.S. Attorney said holds completely true. A lot of these investigations start with tips from not only law enforcement, but from the general public. So as the old saying goes, if you see something, say something. And if it's not to us, maybe it's an organization such as Katie's, or maybe it's Umbrella, or maybe it's someone who can put that person in touch with the needs that they are seeking. Or maybe they don't even seek them, right? A lot of these victims, a lot of these people being trafficked don't even realize it. And maybe it takes someone from the outside to make contact with them, to make them even realize that, hey, you want help. But any of these cases, they start at a base level with an investigation, all right, and talking to people. And if we don't know about it, we're none the wiser, essentially. So it all has to start somewhere, and little things can lead to bigger things. And hopefully, in the end, we can at least identify the people that we believe are victims in this, and lead them on a better path forward. That's essentially where it all starts. Is if you see something, say something to someone, essentially.
Thank you for that. Sheriff, do you want to?
Mayor, can I introduce
Absolutely.
Savannah? Savannah, could you just introduce yourself to the crowd if everybody doesn't know you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi all, my name is Savannah Williams. I'm the site director for Umbrella here in Newport. So Umbrella actually serves 3 counties. We serve Orleans, Essex, and Caledonia County. Our Newport office serves Orleans and Northern Essex County. Umbrella is commonly known for its advocacy program, so we work with victims and survivors of intimate partner violence, human trafficking, stalking, and child sexual abuse, also teen dating violence. We also have many other programs that are under our umbrella of services, And our services are client-led. Very much as folks have already said, we are kind of trying to meet folks where they're at. So we don't force them or bribe them or entice them into any type of services. We are letting them take the lead on the things that they are looking for. We provide hospital advocacy, emotional support, safety planning. We also provide court advocacy for those that might be seeking protection orders. We do have emergency housing, which is very limited and small. We do have a shelter here in Orleans County and a shelter in Caledonia, and we try to work with other community partners and programs around the state if we're not able to meet whatever needs that are lacking in our services. So I just wanted to introduce myself.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
I'm better at answering questions if people have any questions for me. Before I became sheriff, most of you in the room know this, I spent 9, almost 10 years, I think, in the Special Investigations Unit investigating sex crimes involving children. And I know that I missed some of these cases, and we may have charged them differently than what was maybe really happening. So it's been here for a long time. It's not going away. This is something that is very intimate to this community. And as Katie mentioned earlier, we're trying to build a team. The people here have always been here trying to work with these individuals and be there for them and make it a safer community for everybody, but we're trying to be better at that and a little bit more proactive. So I think I just lost my train of thought. It's been a long day. But again, this is, I think because my work was so intimate with children and we didn't really see it in like the U.S. Attorney said, these cases are really hard. And even on our state level, Farzana, our state's attorney, these cases have come through our office, have come through this state's attorney's office, and they are really difficult to bring forward for a lot of different reasons. The justice system re-victimizes our victims, and things of that nature, and there's a lot of bad people that are involved in this kind of activity, so it's really scary. So it should be no shock to anybody that somebody may not want to come forward, may not want to speak to law enforcement, that they're seeking out the services that they can go to and trust and know that they can just go there for the support. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so just touching on that, so Katie has met with us. We've met with like maybe twice already, because we are just trying together, to sort of get law enforcement involved to figure out how we're going to move forward. But it's no surprise, Orleans County, we do have young juveniles who are being trafficked. And a few years ago, I prosecuted a sex case with this young lady who then was trafficked, and she'd come back from Connecticut, and you could see the way she dressed, the way, the money she had, the bags and clothing that she wore. And she would talk to us, and then she'd go back again, so it was always sucking into that lifestyle. We eventually lost her. She passed drug addiction, and I think she ended up having MRSA. But so it's always been something that has been really close to my heart, especially this young woman. And so ever since then, it's always been a passion of mine to be able to do something in this community. We see it all the time. We see whether it's vehicle stops or certain individuals that's constantly appearing and know that they are involved in being trafficked, as well as they're turning up in some of our homicide cases or investigations. And so I think everyone needs to be aware of it, and if you again, like Lieutenant Jensen had said, you know something, say something, and be that support for that individual. And I'm sure Katie would provide some information as well. If you know of a family member or a community member or a neighbor or someone that may need assistance, providing them with Katie's information. I know I'm saying it as though it's really easy to do. Like she had stated, it's they don't believe they're being trafficked. So I think we just all need to be aware of what's going on in our community, and I think some of us just walk around not realizing all of these things that are actually happening in Orleans County.
And we're working really hard as a community in our resources in this area. We're out in the schools. Savannah and I have taught 14 years. We've been going out in the schools and trying to teach healthy relationships so that hopefully that these individuals and our young people, if they're getting caught up because, you know, social media is their life. So we're trying really to kind of teach them, this is what healthy looks like. And these are some of the red flags. So if you see some of your friends, you start feeling like you're experiencing them. There's people in your life that you can turn to hopefully get out of that before it becomes too much. So we're trying to be proactive about that. Katie comes down to the police academy where we're teaching recruits. We go into a lot more depth of what you guys all just learned tonight, so I'm very grateful for the mayor and the state's attorney for putting this together to get our community educated. But we're trying to teach our law enforcement officers who are going to be coming out on the road, stopping motor vehicles, coming into contact with people in their community. You know, these individuals are walking up and down our streets, so that we can be more aware and ask more questions, be curious. You know, not everything that you're going to deal with may have to do with this, but getting to know your community, getting to know the players in it, the people, so that if something like this does happen, you can recognize it and get those people to help, hopefully sooner than later.
Thank you. Before we go to the crime update from our police chief, I want to take some questions. So, yes, please.
You go into schools and educate about this problem?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe not to this language, but we're talking about healthy relationships and what that looks like in some of the red flags. And we do talk about sexual exploitation and what that might look like. So we give examples. We try to be careful of who our audience is, but let's be real. These young people these days know and are way savvier than we ever thought that they could ever be. So, but yes, we are out there trying to give them the education and give them resources.
We also go into technology safety on top of online exploitation and things like that. And we have programming for technology safety as young as 4th graders, all the way up to high schoolers.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question. You're talking about the education that you're giving these students. As parents, are these resources available to us that we can be better informed on how to have these conversations with our young people?
So there, go ahead, Sam.
So one of the things that Umbrella is trying to implement this year is working with all the schools that we're going into to provide a parent night. So that if we're invited to go into a specific classroom or grade to provide a specific program, such as technology safety, that we have a parent night to where we can have these conversations with parents to let them know the language and the topics that we'll be talking about, but also to give out resources to those parents. We also have our social change program manager, Vaughn Massey, who's been partnering with New 92 and presenting some parent tips every other week on the radio. And we're always available for any types of questions or resources. So we're definitely trying to reach the parent population more and trying to meet them where they're at the best that we can.
And we can certainly, if the need is out there, we can certainly try to do something like this in the future for parents. Unfortunately, when we've done it, it has not been very well attended. But we don't give up, so we can certainly try again.
And we do have specific trainings and stuff for parents too that we have available that we've tried different avenues for.
Audrey?
Yes. So I have an 11-year-old, and just last spring, she ended up sending some provocative photos over the internet, and thankfully I caught it and we nipped it in the bud. But if a parent has a child, can they go? Do you have any place where they can bring their child and have individual explanation of safety?
Yes, yep. At Umbrella, we do provide one-on-one education. We specifically have youth advocates and social change specialists that can provide one-on-one education services with youth.
Yes.
Yes, is this also for aunts and uncles to that take care of their nieces and nephews?
It's any adult, any caregiver that has youth in their lives that are concerned or that just want or need the resources
What's your
that they're interested in.
number
So
for the
our,
organization?
yeah, Umbrella's number is 802-334-0148. That's a 24/7 hotline. And our business hours where you'll be able to speak to like the youth advocate or prevention specialist is Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30. But you would call that same number.
I'm going to let our police chief take it from here.
Chief.
Yeah.
Go.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to say thank you to you, Mayor, and Farzana for setting this up. Appreciate you having me. I'm going to head back south. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you
Safe
very
travels. So my piece is not nearly as intriguing as that, but thank you very much for putting this together, Mayor, and Farzana, and the panelists for being here. I will say though, in reference to the human trafficking, like these discussions were not happening that many years ago. We weren't having these kinds of discussions. They are complex investigations. They're hard to investigate, like cops like to investigate a case and be done with it the next day kind of deal. These are very complex, so every part of it, the prosecution part of it's very complex. So the fact that we're having these discussions, the fact that we're trying to put together NDT up here with Katie's help has been tremendous, and really excited about that, so can't thank her enough. My portion of this is just gonna be based on some crime update for Newport specific. This is not related to anything outside of Newport, other than what's going on here. Three things that popped into my head when this came up of what kind of crime are we dealing with in Newport. And right now it's repeat offenders, which cover every single crime you can think of. Drugs, guns, and violence, and there's a homeless population that is growing, it seems like, by the week. I'm gonna go down through because I like stats and they don't really lie, and they kind of paint a picture of what's going on in the police department and what we're dealing with. Yes, our job is to arrest people that commit crimes. That's solely what we do. We also try to help people and give them avenues for resources and things like that. These top 5 arrests, I think, will help kind of shed light on what we are doing. We've had 386 total arrests up to this point, okay? We're not through the year yet. So we've 386 arrests at this point. 92 of those are arresting people on in-state warrants, okay? So these are people that have already been arrested. They've gone to court, they've been released to show back up, and they don't show up, or they've been given a citation to go to court and they don't show up, and then we pick them up. So 92. The next one, we've arrested 91 people for violating their conditions of release, okay? So these are people that have been to court, have been arraigned, been in front of the judge, been released on conditions to follow, but they don't follow them, and then we pick them up and arrest them. Okay, and then we have false info to police officers and unlawful trespass. So those are the top 5 categories, okay? So what this tells me when I look at this, right, like what are we doing? One, we're being very proactive, okay? We can do this because we have a full staff department. That's not the case everywhere in the state of Vermont, okay? So departments that aren't fully staffed cannot go out and find people or see somebody that has a warrant and pick them up. So you can't go the extra step and find somebody that's violating their conditions and pick them up, okay? But the point of this is consuming almost all of our time is warrants, picking people up on violating the conditions that they've been released on, okay? Not even in the top 10 for arrests this year is domestic assault or any assault, larceny, anything like that, okay? I can go down this list and just tell you a few other things. Driving under the influence, that is in the top 10. Drugs, cocaine possession, things like that, that's in the top 10. DLS, unlawful mischief, resisting arrest, okay? Like those are the top 10 categories that we've been dealing with in Newport.
That's DLS, chief.
What's that? Yeah, sorry. DLS is driving with your license suspended, okay? And again, most of those things are proactive enforcement that we're fortunate that we can do. We'll say, I talked about this in February when we did the other forum, most of that conversation was based on the drugs and the guns and the violence that were coming up. That has not changed, okay? That's still ongoing. I will tell you, without going into too much detail, the stats that I have here are just within our own department. The state has a task force. They are very busy, and I can tell you that they have picked off several loads of drugs that were coming to the Northeast Kingdom. Maybe not specifically Newport, doesn't matter, it's all the same thing. They're coming to the Northeast Kingdom. So those are some behind the scene things that are happening that we might not know about, and I don't have the stats for those. The homelessness, I know everyone see it if you walk around Newport during the day. We have a group, I'm gonna say between 10 and 15 individuals that we spend the bulk of our time on almost every day for some kind of call. Like, yes, they're probably more of like a quality of life complaint, a nuisance complaint, I guess if you'll say that. People hanging out on the boardwalk, drinking, they're abusing substances, those kinds of things. They're not necessarily committing crimes. People do call us, right, because we're the police and we're supposed to be able to fix everything. It's hard sometimes because they're not committing a crime, and it's hard to trespass people from public property. Like, you just can't kick people out of places. We get called frequently for, hey, they're over sleeping at the grandstand. Hey, they're over at sleeping at the gazebo. Oh, they're behind the waterfront plaza now, right? So all we're doing is we're just kicking them out of these places constantly. It's not fixing the bigger issue of where are these folks gonna go, okay? Which kind of goes into the next piece is, we have a mental health embedded worker at our office. We actually have 3. One does 2 days and the other 2 do a day apiece. So 5 days a week, we have somebody at our office from Northeast Kingdom Human Services to help us with some of these issues that we have. The program outreach coordinator is a pilot program that we're doing, and its main priority is to go out and help us with situations that we can't necessarily, and I don't want to say arrest people because, you know, yes, that's the worst case scenario for us if we have to do that, but like people that are homeless that are just maybe being a nuisance to the community, right? So their job is to go out with us and try to advocate for these people and get them services, okay? And they've done that. We've had some success with it. I know everyone sees the gentleman pushing the shopping cart around town. We were able to help him out. It was for a very limited time, but to me, that's a win, even if it's for a week, right? And he has point blank said to us, I want to be homeless. Some of the other people, we have been able to get them with hireability and get them down there to try to get a job, try to get something. I don't have an ID, I've been arrested before, no one's gonna hire me, like those kinds of things. So that's what the program outreach coordinator's position is. It's kind of eye-opening a little bit to see that people actually, some people just don't want help, right? So what do we do? Like, I don't know what the answer is to that. We did have an encampment that was up off from the access road that we were able to go down there with the coordinators, and we talked to them and were able to provide them services, and they're still working in the process of finding them some housing for this winter. Prouty Beach Campground, and I know this has come up before, that's kind of being used as a homeless shelter, if you will. There's places that are paying 2 weeks at a time. They're giving people tents and they're saying, here you go, here's 2 weeks to go stay at Prouty Beach, and when the 2 weeks is up, don't know what to tell you. So to me, it's not fixing the issue, right? It's just kind of kicking the can down the road. I think there's a bigger problem that maybe the closest homeless shelter that we have is in St. Jay, and it's always full. Like, we've tried to get people down there. And there is some other parameters too that affect people from not getting in there. But I think those are the main, those are the top 3 issues right now that are consuming our time at the police department. I will say though, like, and I've said it before, in the last couple of years, we've been very fortunate to have like a full-time police staff, because that is not the case everywhere. And we've seen the effects on the news about different places that are dealing with those kind of problems. So we're fortunate that we can do this. So I will leave it at that for now. If you guys have any questions about anything, please don't hesitate to ask. But that's kind of the quick down and dirty update from the police department.
Any questions? Thank you, Chief. So I want to thank everybody here, and you know, Katie brought up a very important point about self-care. Everybody in this room who works in this area has a difficult time because it's intense, and you know, their heart's into it, and they can lose their own desires to want to fix things, but they have to go within the parameters of the law they're restricted, they have to make sure that they are doing their job appropriately. This is intense. And so I thank you for this because it's so important. Does anybody want to add anything, or I want to make sure that I don't cut anybody off and everybody is good. Final questions? So please remember what they said. If you do see what you believe is a victim of human trafficking, let the professionals know. Do not go out and try to attend to the situation yourself. Really reach out. It's very important. This is what they do and while they're here, and they're here to protect us. So thank you, everybody. I greatly appreciate your coming out. Thank you. And thank you for